Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. And traditionally, our first story about Karen. Be the good neighbor Mr. Rogers taught you to be. I live in like a little gated community thing with townhomes and stuff and an HOA. Nothing super fancy by any means, just a quiet little neighborhood. The way it works with parking, and the crux of this story, is that every resident has 2 spots assigned to their unit, and they're yours to do with as you see fit. Use them, leave them empty, let your neighbor use it, let guests use it, park straddling both spots, who cares? They're yours. It's been this way for many years with nary an issue. We have a towing company contracted to the HOA. Now, our tow company is only here to be called at residents or HOA direct request to remove an unauthorized vehicle from their spot. The parking is numbered, but just to identify the spots saved for residents, everyone gets 2, as we don't have any numbered assigned window stickers or anything that serious. The towing contract is rarely used, and really even then just as a last resort. We usually talk to each other like good neighbors do if we have a parking or other issue. So I get home this evening, and right behind me comes a tow truck. The kind they use for stealth pulls, where they lift up one axle and roll you down the road about 20 seconds after arrival. As I get out of my car, I see them pulling a neighbor's car who always parks diagonally in their 2 spots due to a tight parking configuration and a corner spot, making it difficult to navigate even small cars in and out while parking within the lines. Now again, it's their spots, so who cares? Literally nobody, that's who. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You see, the couple that owns the car is a sweet little couple in their 60s, semi-retired, and generally just nice, quiet people. It didn't seem likely to me that their car was being repossessed, and something about the tow truck driver and his either spotter or manager, some random dude in an F-150 following him around on a radio, just made me feel odd. Usually I'm a pretty non-confrontational person, but something about the whole situation made me act in an uncharacteristically assertive manner. So I flagged down the driver as he was beginning to leave with the resident's car. I'll be G, he'll be TT for tow truck. G: Hey, are you pulling a repo or a resident out of their own spot? TT: I'm pulling a resident for parking in 2 spots. That's bullcrap. I've lived here a decade. That's never been a thing. Yeah, well, it's in the contract. You should try reading it. No, I've literally talked to the HOA about exactly this, and they've confirmed what you're towing them for is explicitly not a towable thing unless the resident themselves called it in, and I doubt they asked you to tow their own car. Well, you should talk to them then, because I'm leaving with it. Cool. See you in an hour. So in comes the revenge. In a stroke of righteous karma, the HOA rep, who is responsible for the tow company contract of our complex, got home less than 5 minutes after the tow truck left, and I was out walking my dogs. I walked up to him, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and relayed the situation as well as the fact that they had tagged at least 3 other vehicles in the immediate vicinity for future tows. He simply let out an exasperated, "Ugh, crap," and said he would get on it. I then knocked on the neighbor's door whose car got towed and informed them of the situation as it stood, suggesting that they also contact the HOA rep up the hill. They did so accordingly, and he confirmed that he was already in the process of handling it. We stood out front and chatted for a bit, and he went inside. I retreated to my front porch and waited for what I knew was coming. 20 minutes later, as I leaned against the wall out front, I hear the jingle-jangle of victory coming back into the complex. The tow truck driver drops the car diagonally in both spots, just as he found it, with a scowl on his face. As he leaves, we make eye contact. I grin. He gives me the finger as he leaves. I smile because he knows I won. The neighbor whose car was again parked came outside shortly thereafter, and we chatted again briefly. The HOA rep, whose swift action ensured the car was back in the spot exactly 1 hour from the time it was towed, came down to where we were chatting and apologized for the issue, saying that the towing company has given them other problems recently, and that with this, he would be moving at next month's board meeting to contract with a new company as of January 1. One that actually abides by what we pay them to do, which definitely isn't towing ourselves. In closing, be the good neighbor Mr. Rogers taught you to be. And our second story, chemical warfare. I used to keep a bottle of sriracha in the fridge at my last job. I even went as far as to write on the bottle that anyone could use it, just please return it. About a week in, my bottle of sriracha goes missing. The next bottle I put in the fridge, I wrote, "Do not touch," as someone had already abused the privilege of having a public domain hot sauce. A week or two later, this bottle too goes missing. At this point, I'm heated from my lack of delicious sriracha, so I go out and buy 2 bottles instead of 1. The first I put in my cubby so only I could use it. The second I dumped the top inch of sriracha out of and replaced it with 4 million Scoville hot sauce. I don't know who stole the third bottle, but I know that they were probably crapping blood, as just the residue left on my hands after washing them 3 to 4 times was enough to make me gasp for air when I accidentally touched my finger to my mouth. Poor B-turd. And our third story. The guy in the suit who doesn't know anything. A few years ago, I had the misfortune to work for a truly dysfunctional boss at a micro-niche company that provided training for a certain group of professionals that had to do continuous training. If I mentioned the group, you would know the company, so I won't. I was the senior technical lead for a certain application, so I worked with every department in the company. Anyway, this company was owned by a guy that happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right product and was successful in spite of himself. Since he thought that he was a genius, and he wasn't, of course he packed the company with a whole crew of equally mindless idiots. Think Minions on steroids. But the crown jewel was the sales team. These were the quintessential narcissists who would take a 2-hour lunch with all the sales buddies and boss and have 3 martinis and a couple lines of a certain illegal substance. The one star of the brunch was the bane of my existence while I was there. He would call and demand that I stop what I was doing and fix all of his problems while he was on the phone. Half the time he'd call me later and cuss me out for doing the opposite of what he demanded. I didn't, but he couldn't remember since he was drunk. I finally resorted to telling him to send me an email that explicitly stated what he wanted done. That way I could prioritize his tasks and have proof of exactly what he asked for. However, 5 minutes after he sent the email, he would call me and demand that I stop what I was doing and fix his problems. Since we were in a sales-oriented company, complaining to the boss didn't do any good. All I got was, just make him happy so he doesn't complain to the owner. Thanks, boss. Now comes the revenge. I finally had enough. I was looking for a job anyway, and I was underpaid, so I wasn't worried about any blowback. Whenever something broke and he demanded an immediate explanation, I started using Star Trek Technobabble. Yeah, that report broke because the Heisenberg compensator blew back through the subspace conduit. Sorry, that user couldn't access the system because the dilithium warp router needed to be hooked up to the Jeffries tube. He bought it all. And then comes the best part. I found out the best part after I left the company. He repeated everything I told him to his clients, word for word. They just thanked him for the information and he went on his way. Then they laughed after he hung up the phone. I didn't change anything because even before this, their nickname for him was the guy in the suit who doesn't know anything. And our second story. Deny me my workers' comp? Okay. It was a bad year for me, and the economy was not in great shape. Unemployment was fairly high. I'd been working at a stuck in my memory, went bad, and the owner sold everything and moved to Florida. I finally landed a job at a factory. It was crappy work involving putting zinc plating on metal parts. The owner was all about profit and had little regard for worker safety. Somehow, he'd get a heads up whenever an OSHA inspector was coming. We'd bust butt cleaning, installing safety equipment on the machinery, etc. Once the inspector left, the safety equipment was put back in storage so there would be no wear and tear on it. I suffered through it all, as did my coworkers, because we were young, had no skills or experience, and jobs were scarce. One day, the piece of machinery I used, think of something that looks like a concrete mixer, broke while I was loading it with parts. The drum fell, hitting the bucket I was holding. The bucket was full of metal parts and weighed somewhere around 80 pounds when it was full. This caused me to lose my balance and ultimately injure my back. I tried to tough it out, but I was in a lot of pain. I go tell the foreman. She leaves the floor and finds the owner. She comes back about 10 minutes later and tells me to clock out and go home. I'm young and naive. I know nothing about workers' comp. I spent a few hundred of my own money going to a chiropractor and finally to a doctor. When I go back to work a couple of days later, I'm informed that I've been demoted due to my injury. I'm relegated to being a custodian, and my hourly pay had been cut. I held on for a few months before quitting and moving on. Here's the pro-revenge. It's a few years later, I've graduated college, got a good job, I'm a little older and wiser. I come home from work and I'm watching the evening news. The state I live in has an office similar to the EPA. The news station did one of those human interest stories and interviewed the man who investigated the illegal environmental stuff. The story was about how he had dropped the bomb on a corporation that had been illegally dumping zinc waste. My ears perked up. You see, that company I used to work for used zinc to plate all their little metal parts, lots of zinc. My workstation with that drum, my job was to fill it with the metal parts and then fill the drum with a zinc water acid slurry. Once the parts were plated, guess what the next part of my job was? I dumped the slurry into a trough, which led to a hole in the wall of the factory, which led to a ditch, which led to a creek. The factory had been illegally dumping zinc waste into a ditch. I immediately got in my car and drove there. Aha! The factory was still in business, and they were still dumping the zinc waste into a creek. I took pictures, I took video, and then I turned it all in, along with a notarized affidavit to the state inspector. The original fine was in excess of $100,000. They appealed, and I don't know what the settlement entailed. The business closed shortly after. Sweet revenge. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.